The celestial meridian station hung in the void, like a glittering mathematical problem that had solved itself. 300 levels of academic excellence spiraling around a neutron star that provided both gravity assistance and a convenient metaphor for the crushing pressure of midterm exams. 17 species called this place home, or at least a temporary residence, while they pursued degrees in everything from applied wormhole economics to comparative xenobiology. It was, as the brochures loved to remind everyone, the premier institution of higher learning in this sector of the galaxy. What the brochures didn't mention was that premier often translated to exorbitantly expensive. And this sector was actually a polite way of saying the unfashionable arm nobody else wanted. Humans had been part of the galactic community for exactly 43 years, which in cosmic terms was roughly equivalent to showing up at a party that had been going on for millennia, tracking mud on the carpet and immediately asking where they kept the good alcohol. The other species had opinions about this. Many opinions. Loudly expressed opinions, usually in academic papers with titles like The Concerning Impulsivity of Terran Decision-Making Processes and Why Do They Season Everything? A Study in Chemical Warfare as Cuisine. Marcus Webb didn't particularly care about any of this as he sat in Quantum Mechanics 401, trying to understand why Professor Thexelor insisted that probability waves collapse differently depending on how many appendages you had. Marcus was a third-year engineering student, remarkably average in every quantifiable way, except for his unsettling habit of asking questions that made professors uncomfortable. He had brown hair that never quite cooperated, a face that people described as friendly when they were being kind and forgettable when they weren't, and the kind of stubborn curiosity that had gotten humanity into trouble on 6 separate occasions since joining the galactic stage. The lecture hall was designed for multiple body types, which meant it looked like someone had let a committee of abstract artists loose with architecture software after feeding them hallucinogenic substances. Marcus sat in a human-standard seat, wedged between his roommate Kelvix, a Dranthi whose species resembled what would happen if an octopus and a filing cabinet had a very organized child, and Yoshi, the only other human in their friend group, who was currently asleep with his eyes open, a trick he'd perfected sometime during freshman year. 3 rows ahead and slightly to the left sat Olivia Chen, and this was where Marcus's attention persistently drifted despite his best efforts to care about quantum tunneling. Olivia was the kind of human that made other humans nervous, which was saying something given that their species had a reputation for making everyone else nervous first. She never spoke in class, never socialized in the common areas, never attended the human student union meetings where everyone else gathered to complain about how the cafeteria still couldn't make coffee that didn't taste like industrial solvent. She just appeared, took notes in a physical notebook like some kind of analog rebel, and vanished the moment class ended. "You're staring again," Kelvix whispered, or at least produced the subsonic vibrations that his species used for whispering. It sounded like someone dragging furniture across a floor made of teeth. "I'm observing," Marcus corrected. That's what the Verathans said before they started the Third Contact War. That was completely different. They were observing with weapons. You're observing with your face. It's almost as threatening. Yoshi snorted awake, looked around with the confusion of someone who had no idea what century it was, and immediately zeroed in on Marcus's line of sight. "Still on about the mystery girl?" "I'm not on about anything. I'm simply noting that it's statistically unusual for someone to be this deliberately antisocial in an environment specifically designed for social academic interaction." "Big words for, I think she's hot and weird," Yoshi said. Kelvix's chromatophores flickered with amusement. 50 credits says she's actually 3 small humans in a coat. That's not how humans work, Marcus protested. That's what a small human in a coat would say. Professor Thexilor's voice cut through their discussion. The professor was a Hethrani, which meant he looked like someone had given a praying mantis a doctorate and severe anxiety. For your next assignment, you'll be working in pairs to calculate the probability matrices for faster-than-light communication across varying gravitational fields. Choose your partners now. I won't be mediating disputes later when you realize you've paired with someone incompatible. The room erupted into the controlled chaos of students desperately making eye contact with friends or frantically avoiding eye contact with everyone. Marcus turned to suggest he and Kelvix work together, but Kelvix was already flowing toward a Dranthi exchange student he'd been courting for 3 weeks. Yoshi had vanished entirely, probably to find a partner who wouldn't expect him to do any actual work. That's when Marcus noticed Olivia still sitting in her seat, methodically packing her notebook into a bag that looked like it had survived several small wars. Everyone was avoiding her. Not obviously, nobody wanted to be rude. But in that subtle way, people sidestep around something they don't quite understand. Marcus made a decision that his future self would classify somewhere between questionable and what were you thinking? He walked down to her row. Hey, Olivia, want to partner up? She looked up at him, and Marcus was struck by 2 things. First, her eyes were an unusual shade of gray that seemed to calculate the exact probability of this conversation going poorly. Second, she seemed entirely unsurprised by his approach, as if she'd been expecting it. You don't want to work with me, she said. It wasn't a question or a warning, just a statement of fact, delivered with the same inflection someone might use to mention the weather. Why not? Because I'm going to actually do the work, and that means you'll have to actually do the work, and based on your academic record, you're allergic to completing assignments before the night they're due. Marcus blinked. You know my academic record? I know everyone's academic record. It's publicly accessible through the student portal. That's slightly creepy. That's preparation. She stood up, slinging her bag over her shoulder. But fine. Meet me at Lab 7C tomorrow at 1800 hours. Don't be late. I won't wait. She left before Marcus could respond, moving through the emptying lecture hall like she was navigating invisible obstacles only she could see. Kelvix appeared at Marcus's elbow. Did that just happen? I think so. You realize she's probably going to dissect you for science. Humans don't dissect each other. Are you absolutely certain about that? Marcus wasn't, actually. But he wasn't about to admit it. The next day crawled by with the enthusiasm of a bureaucrat approaching retirement. Marcus attended his other classes, absorbed roughly 15% of the information, and spent the remaining 85% wondering what exactly he'd gotten himself into. The station rumor mill had been working overtime since he'd partnered with Olivia. By lunch, he'd heard that she was a spy for the Terran government, a runaway from a classified military program, secretly royalty from Earth's corporate oligarchy, or, most outlandishly, just someone who preferred studying to socializing. At 1750, Marcus stood outside Lab 7C, which was located in one of the station's older sections, where the walls still bore scorch marks from a chemistry experiment that had gone spectacularly wrong in 2387. The door was closed. No lights visible through the narrow window. He knocked. Nothing. He checked his comm. 1753. The door slid open at exactly 1800 hours. Olivia stood in the doorway, already wearing a lab coat and safety goggles pushed up on her forehead. You're early. That's unexpected. You said not to be late. Most people interpret that as an invitation to be exactly late enough to be annoying, but not late enough to technically count as late. She stepped aside. "Come in. Touch anything without asking first, and I'll recalibrate every device in here to only display results in base 13 mathematics." The lab was a mess, but it was an organized mess, which was somehow more unsettling than regular chaos. Equipment covered every surface. Jury-rigged contraptions connected by cables that followed some arcane logic only Olivia understood. In the center of it all sat a device that looked like someone had asked an AI to design, vaguely threatening technology, and then built it from spare parts. "What is all this?" Marcus asked. "The assignment. The assignment is due in 3 weeks. I know, this is for the final project. The final project is due at the end of the semester. That's 4 months away." Olivia looked at him with an expression that suggested she was reconsidering every life choice that had led to this moment. "Do you want to pass this class, or do you want to be mediocre?" I was hoping for a comfortable middle ground between those options. There is no middle ground. There's excellence, and there's everything else. She pulled up a holographic display, showing the most complicated series of equations Marcus had seen since his professor had accidentally opened his divorce settlement instead of the lesson plan. "We're going to build a quantum entanglement communicator that works across dimensional boundaries." That's ambitious. That's a Tuesday. Now pay attention. I'm only explaining this once. For the next 3 hours, Marcus experienced what could only be described as having knowledge installed directly into his brain via intimidation. Olivia didn't just understand the material. She existed in a state of permanent intellectual communion with it. She moved through concepts the way other people move through air, casually and without thinking about it. But here was the thing that Marcus noticed. She never talked down to him. When he didn't understand something, she found another way to explain it. When he made a mistake, she corrected it without judgment. She was intense, yes, and probably needed to be introduced to the concept of relaxation, but she wasn't mean. "You're better at this than your grades suggest," she said around hour 2. "I'm lazy? No. You're under-challenged. You get bored when things are too easy, so you don't bother completing assignments that don't interest you. Then when things get difficult, you've built up a habit of not trying." She adjusted a calibration setting. It's a common pattern among intelligent people who were told they were smart instead of being taught how to work. Marcus felt uncomfortably seen. "You got all that from working together for a couple hours?" "I got that from watching how you ask questions in class. You only engage when the material gets weird. The moment it becomes rote, you check out." She glanced at him. "Also, your friend Kelvix talks loudly in the cafeteria, and I have excellent hearing. That's still slightly creepy. I prefer thorough." They worked until the lab's automated systems announced that it was closing time. Marcus's brain felt like it had been put through a workout routine designed by someone who hated brains. But he'd also understood more in 3 hours than he had in 3 weeks of lectures. "Same time Thursday?" Olivia asked, already packing up her equipment with mechanical efficiency. "Yeah, definitely." She paused at the door. "Marcus, don't tell anyone what we're working on?" "Why not?" "Because the moment people know you're trying to do something interesting, they either want to steal it or stop it. Sometimes both." She pulled her bag onto her shoulder. "Trust me on this." And then she was gone, leaving Marcus alone with more questions than he'd started with. Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. Classes, then lab time with Olivia, then late nights when Marcus should have been sleeping but was instead researching concepts she'd mentioned. Their project grew more elaborate, more impossible. They weren't just building a communicator, they were fundamentally questioning how information propagated through folded space-time. His friends noticed the change. "You're different," Kelvik said one evening while they were supposedly studying, but were actually arguing about whether the cafeteria's mystery protein was legally classifiable as food. "Different how?" "Focused. It's disturbing. Yesterday you completed an assignment 2 days before it was due. I didn't know humans could do that without some kind of chemical enhancement." Yoshi leaned back in his chair, balancing it on 2 legs in a way that violated several laws of physics and common sense. "It's the girl, isn't it? Mystery Olivia got her hooks into you. We're just working on a project. A project that requires you to disappear for 4 hours every Tuesday and Thursday, and sometimes Saturdays when you think we're not paying attention. I don't disappear, I go to the lab. Same thing." Kelvik's chromatophores rippled with concern. "Be careful, Marcus. Humans are already considered unpredictable. The last thing you need is to associate too closely with the most unpredictable human on the station." But Marcus wasn't being careful. He was being curious, which for humans was roughly the same thing as being reckless with extra steps. He started noticing things, how Olivia always took the same routes through the station. But those routes changed weekly, according to some pattern he couldn't quite identify. How she never ate in the cafeteria, but always had food that looked homemade. How sometimes she'd zone out mid-sentence, eyes focused on nothing, before snapping back with an apology and a better idea for whatever they were working on. The project was nearly complete. It shouldn't have worked. Several professors had published papers explaining in detail why quantum entanglement communicators were theoretically possible, but practically impossible. Which was physics' way of saying, we can't figure it out, so we're going to pretend it can't be done. Olivia had different opinions about impossibility. "Run the diagnostic again," she said on a Thursday evening that had bled into Friday morning. They'd been at this for 7 hours. Marcus's vision was starting to blur. "We've run it 17 times. It works. It works in a controlled environment with no interference. Real-world conditions are chaotic. So we tested in real-world conditions. And if it explodes, then we'll have failed spectacularly, which is more interesting than failing mundanely." She actually smiled at that. It was brief, barely qualifying as a smile. But it was there. "You're starting to think like an engineer instead of a student." Is that a compliment? It's an observation. But yes. They ran the test. The device hummed, vibrated, and then produced a sound, like the universe clearing its throat. The holographic display flickered to life, showing a connection stable across 2 separate quantum states. It worked. They'd done something that wasn't supposed to be possible. "Holy shit," Marcus breathed. "Language," Olivia said automatically. But she was staring at the display with an expression he'd never seen before. Pride, maybe, or relief, or the look of someone who had just proven something important to someone who would never see it. "We should celebrate," Marcus suggested. "We should document everything and prepare for peer review. Or, and hear me out, we could do something fun for 5 minutes before returning to crushing academic responsibility." Olivia considered this with the seriousness of someone defusing a bomb. "What did you have in mind?" "The observatory deck. It's open 24/7 and almost nobody goes there at this hour." "That's not fun. That's just a different location." "Come on. When's the last time you actually looked at space instead of calculating your way through it?" She opened her mouth to respond, closed it, opened it again. "I don't remember." "Then we're definitely going." The observatory deck occupied the top level of the station, a transparent dome that provided an unobstructed view of the cosmos. The neutron star they orbited painted everything in shades of blue-white. And beyond that stretched infinity in all directions. At this hour, the deck was empty, except for them and the universe's indifference to their problems. They stood at the railing, looking out at something too vast to fully comprehend. "Kelvix thinks you're going to murder me," Marcus said eventually. "I know. He's been following us." "What?" "He's very bad at surveillance. Last week he hid behind a waste recycling unit that was half his height." She glanced at Marcus. "Your friends are protective. It's nice. They're idiots, but they're my idiots. Most human relationships can be summarized that way." They stood in comfortable silence, watching a distant nebula do absolutely nothing at speeds incomprehensible to human perception. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus ventured. "You're going to anyway. Why are you here? And I don't mean the station. I mean, why the isolation, the secrecy, the whole mysterious loner routine?" Olivia was quiet for so long, Marcus thought she wasn't going to answer. Then, "Because I tried being open once. I transferred here from the Academy on Earth with perfect scores, recommendations from 3 Nobel Prize winners, and enough enthusiasm to power a small starship." She traced a pattern on the railing. "Within a month, I was that human. The one who was too smart, too driven, too intense. Other students avoided me because I made them feel inadequate. Professors saw me as a threat to their authority. The administration watched me because apparently being competent as a human makes you suspicious. That's stupid. That's politics. Humans are still proving we belong in the galactic community. Anyone who stands out becomes a representation of the entire species. Every mistake is magnified. Every success is scrutinized." She finally looked at him. "So I stopped standing out. I do my work, I keep my head down, and I don't give anyone a reason to make me a problem. But you're working on quantum entanglement communicators. That's literally the opposite of keeping your head down. I'm working on them privately. There's a difference." She turned back to the view. "After graduation, I'll publish. When I have my degree and institutional backing, people can think what they want. But here now, I'm just another student trying to survive academia." Marcus processed this. That's really lonely. It's practical. It can be both. She didn't argue with that. "For what it's worth," Marcus continued, "I don't think you're too intense. I think everyone else is too intimidated by competence. That's a nice thing to say. I'm a nice person occasionally. Occasionally. I have my moments." Something changed between them in that observation deck. Not dramatically. There were no swelling orchestras or sudden declarations. Just a subtle shift from colleagues to something approximating friends. Or at least people who wouldn't mind becoming friends if circumstances allowed. They returned to the lab to find 3 security officers waiting. Marcus's heart dropped into his stomach. Olivia's expression didn't change, which was somehow more concerning than if she'd looked worried. "Ms. Chen, Mr. Webb," the lead officer, a Korathi whose species looked like what would happen if a bird and a bureaucrat had an argument. "We need to ask you some questions about your recent activities in this laboratory." "What activities?" Olivia asked, her voice perfectly neutral. "Reports have been filed concerning unauthorized use of quantum equipment, suspicious energy signatures, and potential violations of the station's research protocols." "Who filed these reports?" Marcus demanded. "That's confidential." "I bet it was Professor Thexelor," Marcus muttered. "He's been weird ever since we started outpacing the curriculum. The officer's feathers ruffled. The source is irrelevant. What matters is that you've been conducting experiments that require oversight and approval. This laboratory is designated for student use under supervision. We're students using a student laboratory, Olivia pointed out. Everything we've done falls within the parameters of our coursework. Building a functional quantum entanglement communicator falls within the parameters of an undergraduate course. Marcus and Olivia exchanged glances. You've been monitoring our project, Olivia said flatly. The station monitors all high-energy experiments. It's standard safety protocol. It's also standard surveillance state nonsense, Marcus added helpfully, earning a sharp look from Olivia that suggested he should probably stop talking. What followed was 3 hours of questioning that felt like it had been designed by someone who had heard about interrogations, but never actually conducted one. The security officers were thorough, paranoid, and clearly operating under the assumption that two humans building something advanced were automatically suspicious. By the time they were released with a warning and a promise of further investigation, Marcus was exhausted and furious. Olivia was just tired. "This is exactly what I was trying to avoid," she said as they walked through the empty corridors. It was 4 in the morning, that special time when even space stations felt abandoned. "It's not your fault. I should have been more careful. Should have predicted they'd notice the energy signatures. You can't predict paranoia." "Yes, I can. I just chose to believe it wouldn't matter." She stopped walking. "I'm sorry, Marcus. You got dragged into this because I wanted a partner who wouldn't ask too many questions. I ask constant questions. You ask the right questions. There's a difference." She looked genuinely upset, which on Olivia manifested as approximately 3% less composed than normal. "They're going to make this difficult now. Investigation, oversight, probably reassignment to different courses to separate us. So we don't let them." "Marcus, no, listen. We built something impossible. We proved that humans can contribute to galactic science beyond just being the species that uses too many condiments and asks uncomfortable questions. We're not letting bureaucratic nonsense kill that. And how exactly do we prevent bureaucratic nonsense? It's one of the universe's fundamental forces. We finish the project. We document everything. We publish our findings before they can classify them or bury them. We go public." Olivia stared at him. "That's either brilliant or spectacularly stupid. With humans, it's usually both." Over the next week, they worked with an urgency bordering on mania. News of the security investigation had spread, as news always did on a station where gossip traveled faster than light. Suddenly, Marcus was the human who'd gotten involved with the weird human, and together they'd done something suspicious. Professors looked at him differently. Other students gave him space in the corridors. Kelvix and Yoshi remained loyal, which meant they showed up at the lab on the 5th day of their sprint toward publication, carrying snacks and moral support. "You look terrible," Kelvix announced. "I didn't think humans could look this terrible without being clinically deceased." "Thanks. That's helpful." Yoshi was staring at their project with the expression of someone trying to understand a language they'd never heard. "So, you actually built this thing?" "We actually built this thing," Marcus confirmed. "And it works?" "It works. That's..." Yoshi searched for words. "That's actually impressive. I didn't think we were the impressive type of humans. I thought we were the accidentally started a fire in the chemistry lab type." "That was 1 time," Marcus protested. "It was 3 times. Olivia emerged from behind the device, where she'd been performing last-minute calibrations. She looked at Marcus's friends with the wariness of someone meeting aliens for the first time, which was ironic given the circumstances. "These are the friends who think you're going to murder me," Marcus explained. "I'm not going to murder anyone. Murder is illegal, and I have standards." "That's exactly what someone planning murder would say," Kelvix pointed out. But his chromatophores were flickering with amusement. They spent the day together, the four of them, documenting the project and preparing the publication. Yoshi turned out to have an unexpected talent for scientific writing, probably because he'd spent years learning how to make his complete lack of understanding sound authoritative. Kelvix provided an alien perspective on the implications, pointing out applications they hadn't considered. And Olivia gradually began to relax. Not completely. Marcus suspected completely relaxed wasn't a state she was capable of achieving, but enough to joke occasionally, to accept help, to be part of a team rather than a solitary force. They submitted their publication on a Friday evening. By Saturday morning, it had been picked up by 3 major scientific journals, forwarded to the Galactic Science Council, and somehow ended up on the station's gossip feeds under the headline, "Human Students Break Physics, Administration Furious." The administration was, in fact, furious. Marcus and Olivia were summoned to Dean Portion's office, which was decorated in what could only be described as aggressively neutral style, suggesting someone who had given up on having opinions about decor sometime during the previous century. Dean Portion was a Valorian, which meant he looked like someone had given a walrus a business degree and severe disappointment in life's choices. He did not look happy, insofar as his species could express happiness or any emotion beyond vaguely disapproving. "Let me see if I understand correctly," he began, his voice like gravel being processed through a bureaucracy. "You two completed a project that several of our senior faculty members have spent decades claiming was impossible. You did this without proper supervision, using equipment designated for basic laboratory exercises, and then published your findings without departmental review. Have I missed anything?" "We cited all our sources," Marcus offered. "This is not a joke, Mr. Webb." "I'm aware, sir. But with respect, we followed all the rules. We used available resources, completed work relevant to our coursework, and shared our findings with the academic community. That's literally what universities are for." "What universities are for?" Dean Portion said slowly, "is structured learning under appropriate guidance. What you've done is reckless, potentially dangerous, and has made the administration look incompetent." "To be fair," Olivia interjected, "the administration's competence isn't our responsibility." The dean's expression suggested he was reconsidering every decision that had led to allowing humans into his institution. "You're both being placed on academic probation, pending a full investigation into your activities." "On what grounds?" Olivia asked. "We haven't violated any specific regulations." "On the grounds that I'm the dean, and I say so." "That's not actually how academic governance works." "Miss Chen, I strongly suggest you stop talking." What happened next would be recorded in station history as the incident, though historians would debate the details for years. The door to the dean's office burst open, and Professor Thexilor skittered in, waving multiple appendages in what his species used for frantic gesticulation. "Dean, you need to see this. Their paper, the quantum communicator. Someone at the Galactic Science Council actually tested it. It works. It works across dimensional barriers. They've nominated it for the Kelvin Prize." The room went very quiet. The Kelvin Prize was awarded once every 5 years to the most significant scientific breakthrough. Winners received funding recognition, and the kind of prestige that turned careers into legends. Dean Porchen looked at Marcus and Olivia, then at Professor Thexilor, then back at Marcus and Olivia. "You're saying these two undergraduates have potentially won one of the most prestigious awards in galactic science?" "Yes. And we were about to place them on academic probation." "Yes." The dean made a sound like a whale sighing under crushing ocean pressure. "Get out of my office, both of you, before I make this situation worse." Marcus and Olivia didn't need to be told twice. They made it approximately 15 meters down the corridor before Marcus started laughing. Olivia joined in, and for a moment they were just two exhausted students who had accidentally done something extraordinary while trying to pass a class. "We're going to be famous," Marcus said when he could breathe again. "We're going to be insufferable," Olivia corrected. "There's a difference." "I can live with that." They walked through the station, and for the first time since Marcus had met her, people weren't avoiding Olivia. They were staring, yes, but with curiosity rather than suspicion. Humans being weird was expected. Humans being brilliant was something the galaxy was still adjusting to. Kelvix and Yoshi found them in the cafeteria, where Marcus was attempting to explain to a very confused food service worker why humans considered coffee a food group. "So," Kelvix said, flowing into a seat with theatrical grace, "our friend disappeared with the mysterious girl. We thought we'd never see him again, and technically, we were right." "What do you mean?" Marcus asked. The Marcus who followed Olivia Chen after quantum mechanics class was a mediocre student killing time until graduation. The Marcus sitting here is someone who won the Kelvin Prize. That's not the same person. That's unnecessarily philosophical for lunch hour. I'm a Dranthi. We're unnecessarily philosophical at all hours. Kelvix's chromatophores rippled with satisfaction. Also, I'm never letting you live this down. You, the king of procrastination, won one of the galaxy's most prestigious awards. We haven't won yet, Olivia pointed out. We're nominated. There's a difference. You'll win, Yoshi said with absolute certainty. Because you're both too stubborn not to. He was right, of course. 3 months later, they stood on a stage in front of the Galactic Science Council, while someone with too many syllables in their name handed them a crystal trophy and a funding grant that made Marcus's eyes water. But that wasn't the important part. The important part was that Olivia Chen, who had spent 2 years making herself invisible, was finally visible for exactly the right reasons. The important part was that Marcus Webb, who had drifted through academic life without purpose, had found something worth working toward. The important part was that humans, those weird recently arrived newcomers who seasoned everything and asked uncomfortable questions, had proven they belonged. And the important part, though nobody would admit it directly, was that sometimes following someone after class led to exactly where you needed to be, even if you had no idea where that was when you started. The galaxy was still adjusting to humanity's presence, still figuring out where these strange primates fit into civilizations that had existed for millennia. But on Celestial Meridian Station, in a laboratory that smelled faintly of ozone and ambition, 2 humans had changed the conversation from "why are they here" to "what else can they do?" The answer, as it turned out, was quite a lot. As long as you were willing to follow curiosity wherever it led, even if that meant disappearing from your old life to emerge into something better. Marcus's friends had been right, in their own way. They never saw him again. They saw someone better.